Hello, scholars. Today we're going to go through a little lesson on how to multiply integers. So feel free to take notes, get a little pencil, get a piece of paper ready, and take some notes along with me if you'd like to. I'll make sure to give you a lot of opportunities to pause and take notes as we go. So first, let's do a little review of what multiplication actually is. So multiplication is when you multiply a number with another number, and you add the first number to itself as many times as the second number tells you to. So that sounds a little bit strange, but let's work through this example to see exactly what I mean. So, in the example below, 3 times 2, we see that the first number is the number 3, and in our definition of what multiplication is, we see that you take the first number and you add it to itself as many times as the second number tells you to. So the first number is 3, but the second number is 2. So what I do is I take the first number and I add 3 plus 3 because I add this number twice. So it goes 1, 2. So since there are 2 3's being added together, my final answer equals 6. So 3 times 2 equals 6. Another example is 5 times 3. I take 5 and I add it to itself 1, 2, 3 times. So that's 5 plus 5 plus 5. Now we know that 5 plus 5 equals 10. So 5 plus 5 plus 5 must equal 10 plus 5, which equals 15. Therefore, we see that 5 times 3 equals 15. So some symbols might be used for multiplication include the X symbol seen here, the dot symbol seen here, and the star symbol seen here. In Ms. Collins's class, we are going to use the X symbol for multiplication. If you ever happen to see a dot or a star being used, just know that that is also for multiplication. So in our class, we are going to be using integers. When we talk about multiplication, we're talking about how to multiply integers. Remember, integers include both positive and negative numbers. So an integer like positive 3 might have a positive part. Excuse me about that, sorry, small mistake. Integer positive 3 is an integer, but also its negative version, negative 3, is also an integer. So we might have positive 3, we might have positive 4, we might have negative 3, we might have negative 4. So integers include both positive and negative numbers. As we saw earlier, multiplying positive numbers is pretty straightforward. We just take the first number and we add it to itself as many times as the second number tells us to. A good rule to remember for multiplying positive numbers is that a positive number times a positive is always a positive number. So if I have one positive number here and one positive number here, then my answer is always going to be positive. However, since integers include both positive and negative numbers, we can do things like multiply positive and negative numbers together. So one question that comes up is, what happens when we multiply a positive number times a negative number? For example, 3 times negative 4 is a problem that we might see where 3 is a positive number and negative 4 is a negative number. This might not seem very clear because before we were only multiplying positive numbers together. But whenever we have a positive times a negative number, you'll see that the answer must be negative. This is a rule that you should take down in your notes if you have time. Pause the video and take notes here. A positive times a negative is always a negative number. So in this case, when we're doing 3 times negative 4, we know that 3 times 4 equals 12, because 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 equals 12. But since we have a positive number times a negative number, our final answer will be negative 12. So we do the normal process of 3 times 4. We remember that since this is a negative number, our final answer must be negative. So remember that a positive number times a negative number is always a negative number. Another shortcut that we'll talk about later is that anytime the signs are different between the two numbers, the answer is negative. So if my first number is positive but my second number is negative, then my answer must be negative. Also, if my first number is negative and my second number is positive, then my final answer must be negative. We'll talk more about that later. So another question that comes up is, what about a negative number times a negative number? For example, we might have negative 4 times negative 4. An important rule to remember is that if we have a negative number along with a negative number, the two negatives negate each other or turn the final answer into a positive. So if I have a negative number times a negative number, my final answer will be positive. So since 4 times 4 times 4 times 4, since 4 times 4 equals 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4, right? So I do 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 times. My final answer is 16, and since I have a negative number and a negative number, my final answer is positive. So this is an important rule to remember. A negative number times a negative number is always, this is a mistake, it's a positive number. A negative number times a negative is always a positive number. So to conclude our video today, there are 4 rules that I want you to remember. There's also 2 shortcuts that come from these rules, but the 4 rules are the most important part. Rule number 1 is that a positive times a positive is always a positive. Rule number 2 is that a positive times a negative is a negative. Rule number 3 is that a negative times a positive is a negative. And rule number 4 is that a negative times a negative is a positive. Please pause and take these down in your notes. All 4 of these rules, please. Or we can see from these 4 rules that there are 2 possible shortcuts to remember in case we ever get tripped up when we're multiplying numbers. If the signs are the same, meaning that both the numbers are positive or both the numbers are negative, then the answer is positive. So if you have 2 positive numbers that you multiply together, the answer is positive. But also if you have 2 negative numbers, then the answer is positive. Anytime that the signs of the 2 numbers is the same, we get a positive answer. Shortcut number 2 tells us that if the signs are different, meaning we multiply a positive number with a negative number, or a negative number with a positive number, the answer is negative. So these are 2 shortcuts that are worth remembering, but the most important piece includes these 4 rules above. Thank you for having fun along with me as we learn to multiply integers.